For nearly 3 centuries, archaeologists have been pulling these things out of the ground across Europe. Bronze, stone, sometimes bone, 12 faces, 12 holes, covered in mysterious knobs, and absolutely zero explanation from the Romans themselves. Not a single mention in any text. No diagrams, no instructions, nothing. The Roman Dodecahedron, a geometric nightmare that's been driving historians mad since 1739. And just when everyone thought we'd figured it out, new discoveries have made the whole thing infinitely stranger. Because here's the twist. The answer isn't what it does. It's where they are. And that changes everything. Let's start with what we're dealing with. Picture a 12-sided die, but instead of numbers, each face has a circular hole. The holes are all different sizes. Some faces have tiny openings you could barely fit a pencil through. Others are wide enough to stick your thumb in. Each corner has a little knob sticking out. The whole thing fits in your palm. Weighs about as much as a smartphone. Now here's where it gets weird. Over 130 of these have been found, from Britain to Hungary. From the Netherlands down to Italy. They're everywhere Rome controlled. But not everywhere Rome existed. Egypt? Nope. Greece? Nothing. North Africa? Zero. Spain and Portugal? Completely absent. The Romans conquered half the known world, but these dodecahedrons only show up in a specific chunk of their empire. The northern frontier. The cold, miserable, constantly rebelling northern frontier. Already this doesn't make sense. For 300 years, archaeologists have been throwing theories at these things like darts at a board, surveying instruments, candlestick holders, gaming pieces, religious artifacts, weapons, calibration tools, knitting aids. Yes, knitting aids. The problem? None of it adds up. If they were surveying tools, why aren't they standardized? Every single dodecahedron is slightly different. Different hole sizes, different knob placements, different weights. Roman engineers were obsessive about standardization. Their military camps were laid out identically from Britain to Syria. But these, all unique. The candlestick theory falls apart even faster. Sure, you could balance a candle on top. You could also balance a candle on literally anything. That doesn't make it a candlestick. Plus, most dodecahedrons show zero evidence of wax or fire damage. And Romans already had candlesticks. Normal ones. Gaming pieces? Maybe. Except nobody's ever found a complete set. And there's no consistency in the numbers. Some sites have 1 dodecahedron. Some have 3. One hoard in Germany contained 26. That's either the worst board game ever designed or something else entirely. Religious artifacts. This was the go-to theory for decades. When archaeologists don't understand something, it becomes religious. But again, why only in the northern provinces? Romans worshipped the same gods everywhere. If this was some cult object, you'd expect to find them across the empire. You don't. The knitting theory actually gained traction for a while. A researcher in the 1990s claimed you could use the different-sized holes to create various finger lengths for gloves. She even made a video demonstrating it. The internet loved it. Finally, a practical explanation. Except for one massive problem. The holes on most dodecahedrons aren't smooth. They're rough, unfinished, sometimes sharp. Running yarn through them would shred the fibers. And more importantly, Romans already had knitting tools. That didn't require casting complex bronze polyhedrons. And that's before we get to the really strange part. These things are expensive. Casting bronze is not a casual hobby. It requires fuel, skill, time, and access to resources. Each dodecahedron represents a significant investment. So why are they showing up in random fields, buried near roads, hidden in wells? One was found in a Roman camp latrine. Someone threw their expensive geometric mystery object into a toilet and left it there. Either that's the world's worst accident or these meant something very different than we've been assuming. Then in 2023, something changed. Not just where they were found, but the context, the specific sites, the associated artifacts, the geological data, everything. And they found a pattern, but not the pattern anyone expected. Here's what they noticed. Almost every single dodecahedron has been found in areas with significant mineral deposits. Copper, silver, lead, iron, gold. places where the Romans were extracting resources from the ground, mining territories. At first, this seemed like a coincidence. Rome mined everywhere. But when they mapped it precisely, the correlation was undeniable. Dodecahedrons cluster around mining operations, specifically around the richest mining operations in the northern provinces. Now we're getting somewhere. But it raises even more questions. Were they mining tools? Survey markers? Some kind of claim stake for valuable territory? The researchers dug deeper. And that's when things got genuinely disturbing. They started looking at demographic data. Who lived in these areas? What happened to the local populations? What were the working conditions like? Roman mines were death traps. Not metaphorically, literally. The survival rate for miners was catastrophically low. Most died within 2 years of starting work. Flooding, disease, malnutrition, exhaustion. Roman mining operations were essentially slow-motion execution chambers. And who worked these mines? Not Roman citizens. Definitely not soldiers. Conquered peoples. Slaves. War prisoners. Anyone Rome could force underground. The northern provinces where dodecahedrons appear. These were constantly revolting territories. Britain rebelled multiple times. Gaul was never fully pacified. The Germanic tribes were perpetually hostile. Rome controlled these regions through overwhelming military force and strategic resource extraction. Here's where the theory takes a dark turn. The researchers found something else. Dodecahedrons almost never appear in residential areas. They're not in Roman villas or towns. They're found on the periphery, in transitional zones, near administrative buildings, along roads connecting mines to processing centers. They're found in places of control, places of oversight, places where the empire managed its conquered populations. And then came the metallurgical analysis. Several dodecahedrons were tested for trace elements. The bronze composition matched local sources. These weren't made in Rome and shipped north. They were cast on site, using local materials by local craftspeople. But here's the kicker. The skill level varies wildly. Some are beautifully crafted, perfectly symmetrical, almost artistic. Others are crude, asymmetrical, barely functional. It's like comparing a luxury watch to a knockoff you'd find at a gas station. Why would quality vary so dramatically if these were official Roman instruments? Roman military equipment was standardized. Roman tools were consistent. Roman anything important was uniform, unless they weren't being made by Romans. The latest theory, and this is where it gets uncomfortable, is that dodecahedrons were tokens, markers, identification objects created by local populations under Roman control, specifically in mining territories. Think about it. You're a conquered people forced to work in mines. The Romans don't care about your identity, your culture, your family, your labor, expendable labor. But you need to identify your group, your family, your claim to small privileges within an oppressive system. So you create markers, complex enough that they can't be easily counterfeited by other groups, geometric enough that they have meaning within your culture's symbolic language, unique enough that each family or clan has their own version. The varying hole sizes, identifiers, the different knob patterns, clan markers, the unique weights and proportions, family signatures, and you make them from bronze, because bronze lasts. Bronze survives burial. Bronze can be hidden and retrieved. Bronze proves ownership when everything else has been taken from you. This theory explains everything. The geographic concentration, the quality variation, the absence of Roman documentation. Why would Rome document the desperate identification systems of conquered miners? It explains why they're found in wells and latrines, hiding places, last-ditch attempts to keep something of value away from Roman authorities before punishment, relocation, or death. It explains why they cluster around the richest mining territories. More valuable resources meant more intensive extraction, which meant larger enslaved populations, which meant more need for internal organization and identification. These populations retained enough cultural cohesion to create and maintain symbolic systems. They weren't fully Romanized. They were resisting through whatever means available. And it explains the silence in Roman texts. Why would Roman administrators document the survival strategies of people they were systematically working to death? There's more. And it gets darker. Recent excavations near Hadrian's Wall uncovered a cluster of 17 dodecahedrons buried together, not scattered, deliberately placed in a single location, a hidden cache. The soil analysis dated them to approximately 165 to 180 AD, right in the middle of the Antonine Plague, the pandemic that killed millions across the Roman Empire. The plague that devastated military camps and mining operations especially hard due to crowded, unsanitary conditions. These 17 dodecahedrons were buried together during a plague. By people who knew they were dying. By people who wanted to preserve something of their identity, their families, their existence. They weren't hiding treasure. They were hiding memory. And here's the part that makes it worse than we thought. If this theory is correct, we've been treating these objects as curiosities for 3 centuries. Museum displays, archaeological puzzles, geometric oddities. We've been displaying the desperate identity markers of enslaved people as decorative mysteries. Every dodecahedron represents someone, a family, a clan, a group of people trying to maintain their humanity under an empire that viewed them as resources to be extracted and discarded. The Romans didn't write about them because to Rome, the people who made them didn't matter. They were background noise, expendable labor in the great machine of imperial expansion. But those people created these objects anyway. They cast bronze into complex geometric shapes, despite having almost nothing. They developed a symbolic language Rome never understood. They left evidence of their existence in the only way available to them. And they succeeded. Because we're still finding them, still puzzling over them, still trying to understand them. The Romans are gone, the empire collapsed, but the dodecahedrons remain. These small bronze objects outlasted the civilization that oppressed their creators. That's not just ironic, it's profound. Now, before we go further, let's address the obvious objection. This is still a theory. Not all archaeologists agree. Some maintain dodecahedrons had practical functions we haven't identified yet. Some think they're military tools. Some insist on the religious artifact explanation. And they might be right. Science requires skepticism. But the evidence keeps pointing in one direction. New discoveries keep reinforcing this theory. A dodecahedron found in Belgium in 2024 had inscriptions. Worn down, almost invisible. But they're not Latin. Not any known Roman script. A local language. A language Rome tried to erase. The inscriptions haven't been fully translated yet, but preliminary analysis suggests names, personal names, family names. If you needed more evidence that these were identity markers, there it is. Someone carved their name into bronze because it was the only way to ensure they'd be remembered. And we almost missed it. For 300 years we looked at these objects as puzzles, not as testimony, as curiosities, not as evidence of lives lived under systematic oppression. The Roman Empire was one of history's great civilizations. Engineering, law, literature. Rome gave the world incredible things, but it also extracted incredible suffering from millions of people whose names we'll never know. The dodecahedrons are what remains. Small bronze voices saying we were here, we existed, we mattered. And that's worse than we thought because it means we've been getting it wrong this whole time. Every museum label that calls them mysterious, every documentary that presents them as unsolved riddles, every archaeological paper that focuses on the geometric precision rather than the human cost. We've been telling the wrong story. The real mystery isn't what they were for. It's how we missed what they meant for so long. How we looked at desperate acts of cultural preservation and saw only enigmatic craftsmanship. How we examined evidence of systematic dehumanization and concluded the interesting part was the geometry. So what happens now? Do museums change their displays? Do textbooks get rewritten? Do we start talking about Roman dodecahedrons as human rights artifacts rather than archaeological curiosities? Maybe. Slowly. Academia moves like continental drift. Young researchers are approaching these objects with new questions. Not what are they, but who made them and why did they need to? And more dodecahedrons keep appearing. Someone found one in Romania last month. Another turned up in northern France. Each new discovery adds data. Each new analysis refines the theory. The Romans left us detailed records of their military campaigns, their political systems, their infrastructure projects. They documented everything they considered important. But they didn't document this. The dodecahedrons document themselves. These small bronze shapes are speaking across 2,000 years, telling a story Rome never wanted told. A story about the people who built the empire from below, who mined the metals, who worked the land, who provided the labor that made Roman civilization possible, and who created beautiful, complex geometric objects in their spare moments. Not because they had to, because they could, because making something meaningful, something that identified them as individuals rather than resources, was an act of defiance. Every knob, every hole, every unique variation was saying we're not just labor. We're people. We have families. We have cultures. We have names. The Romans couldn't erase that. 2,000 years couldn't erase that. And now, finally, we're learning to read what they wrote. So yeah, scientists solved the Roman dodecahedron mystery. And it's worse than we thought. Not because the answer is disturbing, though it is, but because the question we were asking was wrong from the start. We should have been asking who needed to create these. We should have been asking what circumstances required desperate preservation of identity. We should have been asking whose voices have been missing from the Roman story. The dodecahedrons were answering those questions the whole time. We just weren't listening. Until now.